Hey, how are you guys doing? I'm back. I am uploading the previously recorded video over Tesla and the Cabbage Patch Kids, and I wanted to get into the Smoky God because this is a short read. I'm just going to read to you guys, not going to do a lot of elaboration. We left off in part 3, and it was Beyond the North Wind is where I'm going to start and pick it up. Just sit back and listen, and if you're doing something, cleaning, washing your vehicle, cooking dinner, or what have you, just or even taking a nap, let me put you to sleep, as my kids would say. All right, part 3, Beyond the North Wind. I tried to forget my thirst by busying myself with bringing up some food and an empty vessel from the hold. Reaching over the side rail, I filled the vessel with water for the purpose of laving my hands and face. Okay, maybe he meant washing his hands and face. To my astonishment, when the water came in contact with my lips, I could taste no salt. I was startled by the discovery. Father, I fairly gasped. The water, it is fresh. What, Olaf? Exclaimed my father, glancing hastily around. Surely you are mistaken. There is no land. You are going mad. But taste it. Taste it, I cried. And thus we made the discovery that the water was indeed fresh, absolutely so, without the least briny taste or even the suspicion of a salty flavor. We forefilled all of our 2 remaining water casks, and my father declared it was a heavenly desperation of mercy from the gods of Odin and Thor, better known as Inky and Enlil. We were almost beside ourselves with joy, but hunger bade us in our enforced fast. Now that we had found fresh water in the open sea, what might we not expect in this strange latitude where ships had never been before or sailed, and the splash of an oar had never heard? We had scarcely appeased our hunger when a breeze began filling the idle sails, and glancing at the compass, we found the northern point pressing land against the glass, or the northern point hard against the glass of the compass. In response to my surprise, my father said, I have heard of this before. It is what they call the dipping of the needle. We loosened the compass and turned it at right angles with the surface of the sea before it. Point would free itself from the glass and point. And then it says, in volume 1, page 196, Nansen writes, it is a peculiar phenomenon, this dead water. We had a better opportunity in studying in that we desired. It occurs when surface layer of fresh water rests upon the salt water of the sea, and the fresh water is carried along with the ship gliding on the heavier sea beneath. It is on a fixed foundation. The difference between the 2 straits or strata was in this case so great that while we had drinking water on the surface, the water we got from the bottom cock of the engine room was far too salty to be used for the boiler. Okay, so what he's saying simply is on the surface of the water, it was fresh water, but the further down you go, the settlement, it turns into salt water. Interesting. So then he says, according to unmolested attraction, it shifted uneasily and seemed as unsteady as a drunken man, but finally pointed a course. Before this, we thought the wind was carrying us northward, or north by northwest, but with the needle free, we discovered if it could be relied upon that we were sailing slightly north by northeast. Our course, however, was ever tending northward. So they were going north, but they had changed direction slightly to go northeast. Okay. The sea was serenely smooth with hardly a choppy wave, and the wind brisk and exhilarating. The sun's rays, while striking us assailant, furnished tranquil warmth. And thus time wore on day after day, and we found from the record in our logbook, we have been sailing 11 days since the storm in the open sea. It's almost 2 weeks. By strictest economy, our food was holding out fairly well, but beginning to run low. In the meantime, one of our casks of water had been exhausted, and my father said, well, we'll fill it again. But to our dismay, we found the water was now as salt as in the region of the Lofton Islands of the coast of Norway. This necessitated our being extremely careful of the remaining cast. So I think they filled up 2 casts and they depleted 1, right? And it's been about 2 weeks. So he said, I found myself wanting to sleep much of the time, whether it was the effect of the exciting experience of sailing in unknown waters or the relaxation of the awful excitement incident to our adventure in a storm at sea or due to a want of food, I could not say. So they still had food, but they were doing more of a fast, I guess you could say, with them stretching their rations out. So he says, I found myself wanting to sleep much of the time. So I don't know, maybe it could be the sun too. The sun is supposed to use to charge our energy vessels up. And sometimes people, depending on if you got a lot of toxins, you could get sleepy and fall asleep in the sun too. I'm just saying, it makes you tired. I frequently laid down on the bunker of our little slope and looked far up into the blue dome of the sky. And notwithstanding the sun was shining far away in the east, I always saw a single star ahead. For several days, when I looked for that star, it was always there directly above us. It was now, according to our reckoning, above the 1st of August. The sun was high in the heavens and was so bright that I could now no longer see the one lone star that attracted my attention a few days earlier. It says in volume 2, pages 18 and 19, Nansen also writes about the inclination of the needle. Speaking to Johnson, his aide, one day, it was in November 24th, he came in to supper a little after 6 o'clock, quite alarmed, and said there was just being a single inclination of the needle in 24 degrees, and remarkably enough, its northern extremity pointed to the east. We again found in Perry's first voyage on page 67 the following. So there's multiple voyages or captains, admirals that have taken this trip to go northward, and they're recalling the accounts in different books is what he's doing. At the bottom of his story, he's laying that in within this, okay? So it says, we again find in Perry first voyage, page 67, the following. It has been observed that from the moment they had entered Lancaster Sound, the motion of the compass needle was very sluggish, and both this and its deviation increased as they progressed to the westward and continued to do so in the descending this inlet. Having reached latitude 73 degrees, they witnessed for the first time the curious phenomena of the directive power of the needle becoming so weak as to be completely overcome by the attraction of the ship, so that the needle might now, he said, to point to the north pole of the slip. Okay. And the way they write this with their English, you have to kind of really just listen and just kind of picture it in your head. He says, one day about this time, my father startled me by calling my attention to a novel sight far in front of us, almost at the horizon. It is a mock sun, exclaimed my father. I have read of them. It is called a reflection or a mirage. It will soon pass away. So he saw the sun in the reflection, and here's the sketch. So he's saying that's not the real sun. It was another one, second sun. Okay. But this dull red false sun, as we suppose it to be, did not pass away. Okay. For several hours. And while we were unconscious of it, emitting sun rays of light. Still, there was no time, therefore, after we could not sweep the horizon in front and locate the illumination of the so-called false sun. During a period of at least 12 hours out of every 24 hours. Clouds and mist would at times almost, but never entirely, hide its location. Gradually, it seemed to climb higher in the horizon of the uncertain purple sky as we advanced. It could hardly be said to resemble the sun, except its circular shape, and when not obscured by clouds or the ocean mist, it had a lazy red bronze appearance, which would change to a white like a luminous cloud, as if reflecting some greater light beyond. Interesting. So they saw a second sun there, or what they want to call, I guess, a false sun. So it says, we finally agreed in our discussion of the smoky furnace colored sun that whatever the case or whatever the cause of this phenomena, it was not a reflection of our sun, but a planet of some sort, a reality. One day soon after this, I felt excited, exceedingly drowsy, and fell into a sound sleep. But it seemed that I was almost immediately aroused by my father's vigorous shaking of me by the shoulder and saying, "Olaf, awaken. Here is land in sight." I sprang to my feet. Oh, joy unspeakable! There, far in the distance, yet directly in our path, were lands jutting boldly into the sea. The shoreline stretched far away to the right of us, as far as the eye could see. All along the sandy beach were waves breaking into choppy foam, receding and then going forward again, ever chanting in the monotonous thunder tones the song of the deep. Okay, the banks were covered with trees and vegetation. I cannot express my feeling of exultation at the discovery. My father stood motionless with his hand on the tiller, looking straight ahead, pouring out his heart as in thankful prayer and thanksgiving to the gods, Odin and Thor. So they've went through this passage and they've experienced the currents where there's salt water at the bottom, fresh water on the top. They went through storms. They sailed at least almost 2 weeks, right? I'm just saying, from the time that they had did the logs, or they said 11 days. So by pressing on, it took them probably 2 weeks to get to land. Okay. So it says in another book, he said, Nansen on page 394 says, today another noteworthy thing happened, which was that about the midday we saw the sun, or to be more correct, an image of the sun, for it was only a mirage. A peculiar expression was produced by the sight of that glowing fire. It lit just above the outermost edge of the ice, according to the enthusiastic description given by many Arctic travelers of the first appearance of this god of life after the long winter night. The impression ought to be of jubilant excitement, but it was not so in my case. We had not expected to see it for some days yet, so my feeling was rather one of pain or disappointment that we must have drifted further south than we thought. So it was well pleasure I soon discovered that it could not be the sun itself. The mirage was at first a flattened out, glowing red streak of fire on the horizon. Later, there were two streaks, the one above the other, with dark green space between, and from the main top, I could not see 4 or even 5 such horizon lines directly, one on top of each other, all equal length, as if we could only imagine a square, a dull red sun with the horizon dark streaks across it. Okay, that's what the other captain wrote in his log. Okay, so what are we looking at on time? 13 minutes. All right, let me read another page. This is going to be really short. In the meantime, a net which we found in the storage had been cast, and we caught a few fish that materially added to our dwindling stock of provisions. The compass, which we had fastened back in its place in fear of another storm, was still pointing due north and moving on its pivot, just as it did in Stockholm. This dipping of the needle had ceased. What could this mean? Then, too, our many days of sailing had certainly carried us past the North Pole, and yet the needle continued to point north. We were sorely perplexed, for surely our direction was now south. We sailed for 3 days along the shoreline, then came to the mouth of a fjord or river of immense size. It seemed more like a great bay. Into this we turned our fishing craft, the direction being slightly northeast of the south. By the assistance of a fretful wind that came out to aid about 12 hours out of every 24 hours, we continued to make our way inland in what afterward proved to be a mighty river, which we learned was called by the inhabitants the Hakadil. We continued our journey for 10 days thereafter and found we had fortunately attained a distance inland where ocean tides no longer affected the water, which had become fresh. Now they're still sailing because, like I told you, there's more land than what they're telling us. Okay, you just got to get past these portals or passages, and the custodians or the parasites heavily monitor these things, and then they have technology to do that. So, you know, they went through a bad storm, but they made it out on the other side. So it says, we continued our journey for 10 days thereafter and found we had fortunately attained a distance inland where ocean tide no longer affected the water, which had become fresh. And he said, the discovery came soon that we were remaining cast of water was well nigh exhausted. We lost no time in replenishing our cask and continued to sail further up the river when the wind was favorable. Along the banks, great forests, miles in extent, could be seen stretching away on the shoreline. The trees were enormous size. We landed after anchoring near a sandy beach and waded ashore and were rewarded by finding a quantity of nuts that were very palpable and satisfying to hunger, and a welcome change from the monotony of our stock of provisions. It was about the 1st of September, over 5 months, we calculated, since our leaving taking from Stockholm. They sailed 5 months. Just saying. Suddenly, we were frightened almost out of our wits by hearing in the far distance the singing of people. Very soon thereafter, we discovered a huge slip gliding down the river. Okay. And it says, and it was coming directly toward us. Those aboard were singing in one mighty chorus that echoing from bank to bank. And it sounded like 1,000 voices, filling the whole universe with quiverly melody. The accompaniment was played on strange instruments, not unlike our harp. It was a larger ship than we had ever seen and was differently constructed. At this particular time, our slope was becalmed and not far from the shore. The bank of the river, covered with mammoth trees, rose several hundred feet in beautiful fashion. We seemed to be at the edge of some primeval forest that doubtless stretched far inland. The immense craft paused, and almost immediately a boat was lowered, and 6 men of gigantic stature rowed to our little fishing slope. They spoke to us in a strange language. We knew from the manner, however, that they were not unfriendly. They talked a great deal amongst themselves, and one of them laughed immoderately as though in finding a queer discovery had been made. One of them spied our compass, and it seemed to interest them more than any other part of our slope. Finally, the leader motioned as if he asked whether we were willing to leave our craft to go on board their ship. What say you, my son? Asked my father. They cannot do any more than kill us. They seem to be kindly disposed, I replied, although it was terrible giants. Okay, I'm going to show you a picture. These guys look to be like 15 to 20 feet tall. And remember now, my ass is 5'5". I'm short. Okay. They must be select 6 of the kingdom's crank regimen. Just look at their great size. We may as well go willing as to be taken by force, said my father, smiling, for they are certainly able to capture us. Thereupon he made known by signs that we were ready to accompany them. Within a few minutes, we were on board the ship, and a half an hour later, our little fishing craft had been lifted boldly out of the water by a strange sort of hook and tackle and set on board as a curiosity. So that ship was big enough to pick their little boat up and put it on their ship. That's how tall these beings were. They might have even been 15 to 20 feet. I don't know. It says there were several hundred people on board this, to us, mammoth ship, which was called the Naz, meaning, as we afterward learned, pleasure, or to give a more interpretation, pleasure excursion ship. And this is what it looks like. And this is these guys. So this is them, father and son, and then these are the giants. So if this man is maybe 6 foot, then these guys are at least 15, maybe 12 to 15 feet tall, if not more. Because this guy's bending down. See what I'm saying? I mean, it's got to be huge. So this last part that I'm going to read, and this is going to be it. Thank you. If my father and I were curiously observed by the ship's occupants, this strange race of giants offered us an equal amount of wonderment. There was not a single man aboard who would not have measured fully 12 feet in height. Yeah, see? They all wore full beards, not particularly long, but seemingly short cropped. Okay. They had mild and beautiful faces, exceedingly fair with ruddy complexions. Ruddy is my complexion. I'm ruddy, dark, muddy, ruddy. Okay. The hair and beard of some were black, others sandy, and still others yellow. The captain, as we designated, um, the dignitary in command of great vessel, was fully a head taller than any of his companions. The woman averaged from 10 to 11 feet in height. Their features were especially regular and refined, while their complexion was of most delicate tint, heightened by a beautiful glow. Both men and women seemed to possess that particular case of manner which we deem a sign of good breeding, and notwithstanding their huge statures, there was nothing about them suggesting awkwardness. As I was a lad in only my 19th year, I was doubtless looked upon as a true Tom Thumb. My father's 6'3" did not lift the top of his head above the waistline of these people. So if he's 6'3", I'm 5'5", I'd look like a little ant to them. I'm trying to tell you, I would. All right, you guys, we're at 21 minutes. I'm going to stop it there. So they're aboard the ship of these giants. The women are 10 feet tall. The men are at least 12 feet because we know his dad is 6'3" and he's 19. So I'm assuming he's probably not even 6 feet, right? And I'm going to stop it there, I think. But although we only got like 3, 4 pages, maybe. Should I keep reading in my 21 minutes? Let's see how far I get. I'm stopping it at 30. So we've got like 9 minutes. So let's keep it going, okay? So he says, each one seemed to vie with others in extending courtesies and showing kindness to us, but all laughed heartily. I remember what they had to improv chairs for my father and myself to sit at a table. They were so damn short. They were richly attired in a costume peculiar to themselves and very attractive. The men were clothed in handsomely embroidered tunics of silk and satin and belted at the waist, and they wore knee breeches and stockings of a fine texture, while their feet were encased in sandals adorned with gold buckles. We early discovered that gold was one of the most common metals known, and that it was used extensively in decoration. Okay. Strange as it may seem, neither my father nor myself felt the least bit of solitude for our safety. We had come into our own, my father said to me. This is the fulfillment of the tradition told me by my father and my father's father, and still back for many generations of race, that this is absurdly the land beyond the north wind. Okay. We seemed to make such an impression on the party that we were given specialty in charge of one of the men, Jules Gellion, and his wife, for the purpose of being educated in their language. And we, on our part, were just as eager to learn as they were to instruct. At the captain's command, the vessel was swung cleverly about and began retracting its course up the river. The machinery, while noiseless, was very powerful. The banks and trees on either side seemed to rush by. The ship full speed, at times surpassed that of any railroad train or which I had ever ridden, even here in America. It was wonderful. In the meantime, we had lost sight of the sun's rays, but we found a radiance with them emanating from the dull red sun, which had already attracted our attention. Now giving out a white light, seemingly from a cloud bank far away and from us, it dispensed a greater light. I should say that 2 full moons on the clearest night. 2 full moons on the clearest night. In 12 hours, this cloud of whiteness would pass out of sight as if it eclipsed, and then the 12 hours following corresponded with our night. We early learned that these strange people were worshipers of the great cloud of night. It was the Smoky god of the inner worlds. Okay. And that's the title of this book. Okay. So it says the ship was equipped with a mode of illumination, which I presume was electricity, but neither my father nor myself were sufficiently skilled in mechanics to understand whence came the power to operate the ship or to maintain the soft, beautiful lights that answered the same purpose of our present methods of lighting the streets of our cities or houses and places of business. It must be remembered the time of which I write this autumn of 1829. And we of the outside surface of the earth knew nothing then, so to speak, of electricity. Okay. So again, that's the conditioning. Even with him being at this point in time, the fall of Tartary had happened, and you've already got his father and his father's father, and that generation to where they were replanted or repopulated, right? So they're under the impression that there was no electricity and there were no these grand cities. They didn't know anything about that, right? Or if they did, they weren't taught it, right? Or maybe they knew that there were cities, but maybe where they were as far as location or a small town, they weren't privy to Tartary, because this was back during the fall and the Reconstruction. Okay, because we're looking at the early 1800s, and this is why I wanted to read this book, because it talks about Antarctica, talks about the lands beyond the ice walls, and that's why I tied this in. So it's just interesting enough to me when he says that they didn't know anything about electricity then. I kill you. When they destroyed everything, they really did a number on all of us. The electrical surcharge condition of the air was constant, a vitalizer. I never felt better in my life than during the 2 years my father and I sojourned on the inside of the earth, because we're electrical appliances and they were getting charged up. I'm just going to say it. So, to resume my narrative of events, the ship on which we were sailing came to a stop 2 days after we had been taken on board. My father said, as nearly as he could judge, we were directly under Stockholm or London. The city we have reached was called Jehu, 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 signifying a separate town. The houses were large and beautifully constructed and quite uniform in appearance, yet without sameness. The principal occupation of people appeared to be agriculture. The hillsides were covered with vineyards, while the valleys were devoted to the growing of grain. I never saw such a display of gold. It was everywhere. The door casings were inlaid and the tables were veneered with sheets of gold. Domes of the public buildings were covered in gold because it was conducive to the electricity. It was used most generously in the finishings of great temples of music. Vegetation grew in lavish abundance, and fruit of all kinds possessed the most delicate flavor. Clusters of grapes 4 and 5 feet in length, each grape as large as an orange, and apples larger than a man's head, typified the wonderful growth of all things on the inside of the earth. Now, that's interesting enough. So when he went through the storms, could it have been where they went downwards? Because now he's saying they're inside the earth and not beyond the ice walls, which is tricky to me, because who knows? I mean, I'm not saying believe is a lack of knowledge and knowing. I won't ever know until I go to Antarctica. That's all I'm going to say. I won't ever know what exists beyond this, because this is all that I've known since I've been in this avatar, right? So they went inside the earth, whereas Admiral Byrd was on the surface of the earth and past the walls. So I'm telling you, this earth is much bigger than we all know. So it says, to resume my narrative events, the ship on which we were sailing came to a stop 2 days after we had been taken on board. Okay, so they went to the city of Jehu, and that signifies a seaport there. He said gold was everywhere, the size of the fruit inside of the earth was huge, right? And it tasted divine. The great redwood trees of California would be considered mere underbrush compared with the giant forest trees extending for miles and miles in all directions. In many directions along the foothills of the mountains where herds of cattle were seen during the last day of our travel on the river. We heard much of the city called Eden, but was kept at Jahu for an entire year. By the end of that time, we had learned to speak fairly well the language of this strange race of people. Our instructors, Jules Gideon and his wife, exhibited a patience that was truly commendable. One day, an envoy from the ruler at Eden came to see us, and for 2 whole days, my father and myself were put through a series of surprising questions. They wished to know from whence we came, what sort of people dwelt without, what God we worshiped, our religious beliefs, the mode of living in our strange land, and 1,000 other things. Wow. I guess they don't get many visitors inside the earth. The compass which we had brought with us attracted especially attention. My father and I commented between ourselves on the fact that the compass still pointed north, although we now know that we had sailed over the curve or edge of the Earth's aperture and were far along southward on the other inside surface of the Earth's crust, which, according to my father's estimate and my own, is about 300 miles in thickness from the inside to the outside surface. Relatively speaking, it is no thicker than an eggshell, so that there is almost as much surface on the inside as on the outside of the earth. The great luminous cloud or ball or dull red fire, fiery red in the mornings and evenings, and during the day giving off a beautiful white light, the smoky god, is seemingly suspended in the center of the great vacuum within the earth and held to its place by the immutable law of gravitation or a repellent atmospheric force, as the case may be. I refer to the known power that draws to repel with equal forces in all directions. The base of the electrical cloud or central luminary, the seat of the gods, is dark and non-transparent, save for innumerable small openings, seemingly in the bottom of the great support or altar of the deity upon which the smoky god rests, and the lights shining through these many openings twinkle at night in all splendor and seem to be stars as natural as stars as we see shining when in our homes in Stockport, expecting that they appear much larger. The smoky god, therefore, with each daily revolution of earth, appears to come up at the east and go down in the west, and same as does our sun on the external surface. Okay. In reality, the people within the believe that the smoky god is the throne of their Jehovah and is stationary. The effect of night and day is therefore produced by the earth's daily rotation. I have since discovered the language of the people of the inner world is known as Sanskrit. Okay. And I'm going to stop it right there because I'm at 30 minutes or a little bit over. So we've come to a good point in this book. When I come back, we'll finish up this section. And I started off on us, remember, I started on us reading about the voyage and what they went through in part 3, Beyond the North Wind. And they came upon the giants. They got on their ship. They took them to the city Jahud, and the people from Eden came in and talked to them. And again, they're not beyond the ice walls. They're inside the earth, okay? So, like I said, this earth is much larger, much bigger than we could ever know. I just wanted to make sure that you guys understood that. And then when I come back, we will try to finish up the rest of this part. We only have a page and a half left, that's it. And then we'll get into part 4 and then part 5, and then we're done. So anyway, I appreciate you guys listening to me read. Again, this ties into everything that we've read previously. The Smoky God talks about the inner earth voyage, and then Claudio Naselli's work talks about the lands beyond ice walls. So there is much to discover and discover in this dome. Okay, we call it Earth. We're conditioned to say it's a spinning planet when we really know that it is far from that. Okay. Anyway, I hope you guys have an amazing Sunday, and thanks for joining me. And I will talk to you guys soon. Be the change you want to see all around this dome, because it's up to you and I to make a positive change. Bye.